Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to show you one of the big projects that we got accomplished this spring. So if you'd follow me, I'm going to show you where that is. Right here in the side of our house, on the other side of this makeshift fence, is our raised garden beds. So this is like super exciting for me because I have wanted these for the longest time, and we finally have them put in. So I just wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about just the things that we considered before putting them in, and just the materials that we used if you are considering putting them in this year. So some of the factors that I considered before putting these raised beds in are, well, if you're putting them in, the one thing to first consider is sunlight. So you can put your raised beds pretty much anywhere, but you would ideally like to maximize sunlight, or the amount of sunlight that the plants are getting through the day. A majority of these annual vegetable type crops require at least 6 hours of sunlight in a day. And so if you pick a south facing spot, you're going to get that. That's kind of how we have ours planted. They're all south facing, and the sun goes across from left to right, and at least 5 of the 6 beds gets a full day of sunlight, except for this guy. And so I'm actually trying. Okay, Khan's joining us for this video. Please excuse him if he starts barking. Um, this one over here gets about, I'm going to say, well, probably 6 hours at maximum, and then the house tends to shade it towards the end of the day. So I have the option of planting things that don't require a full amount of sun. So that's one thing to consider. The second thing that I'm always talking about is irrigation. So the irrigation system, the other reason that we actually put them here right next to the house versus out in on the rest of our property is that we don't have irrigation further out. Whereas over here we were able to connect it to one of the pipes leaving our house, which I will show you. It is actually coming from our patio up there, and we had our general contractor put in some tubing, and I got 2 things in. So I first have a hose, a handheld hose, so just in case the drip irrigation that we installed isn't enough. So we have that, and then we also have installed a drip line, which goes all the way. It goes all the way down each box underground and follows along all the way to the last box at the end. And from the tubing that we got, we installed the drip tubes. And I actually discovered this year that there's actually different types of drip tubing, which is great. I guess things have changed since the last time I dealt with drip irrigation. So you've got the basic drip line that has a little perforation, and it drips out of the single spot. This is great, but we've come to realize that it doesn't put out a lot, especially if you have a dry summer. The other is this kind of weeping. It's called a soak hose, if I'm not mistaken. I'll link it in the description box. But I think it's called a soak hose. And what this does is basically weeps the entire tubing, and it puts out a lot more water than just the individual drip spots. So what we're trying to do is kind of experiment with the both of them and see where for plants that we need more water, we're using the soaker hose, versus the ones that don't, we're using the little individual drip lines. There's actually a third type of tubing that we used, and I think it's all the way in our final box because we kind of started running out of the basic drip line. And I'm trying to see if I can spot it. Um, it actually looks a lot like the drip tube itself, and maybe if we run it for you, we can show you. But this one puts out a small amount of spray, so it's actually more of an individual sprinkler almost, which is different from the drip line. That's another variation of drip tubing that we have in here. So that's another thing to consider, which is, do you have the irrigation? Because you're going to want some sort of consistent watering for these vegetables. And hand watering is fun for a little while until it gets really boring. So that's the second factor to consider when putting in raised beds. The third thing is the height of the plants that you are putting in. So if you look, well, this is a kind of a poor example, but I have a strawberry patch over here, and most of these aren't going to get very tall, um, which is, it is what it is. But I have some raised beds that have tomato plants in them, like this one, for example. On this side, I have tomatoes. I have a gap in between because I'm not sure what I want to plant there yet. But the reason that the height of the plant is important is, first of all, if you have things like tomatoes or fruiting vegetables or fruits, you might want to consider covering them at some point because birds are going to start pecking at them and destroying them. So you're going to need to consider how much of a height it gets to cover it. The other thing is it's going to start to hide the plants behind it from sunlight. Um, like the tomato plants get pretty tall, and if I had anything behind it, it wouldn't get as much sunlight as you would want it to. Um, so that's just something that just to keep in mind and just how you're arranging your vegetables. I this year just got so overzealous. I may have planted kind of haphazardly because I was planting as we were building these raised beds. So I have some tomatoes here. I have some tomatoes and chilies further out. I tried to the best of my ability to like kind of put them on the sides just so that I can plant something in front of them that will get sunlight. But we'll see how it goes this year. I'll try and be more organized for the next season. The other thing that you might want to consider, which I guess is the fourth factor, is the materials of the raised beds. So a lot of people actually use untreated wood for their raised beds, and that's actually what's recommended, mostly because treated wood tends to leach out a lot of chemicals that you probably don't want going into your raised beds, into the soil, which is then going to get taken up by your plants, and then you're going to end up eating it, which is going to ideally be unhealthy. So there's a lot of different types of untreated wood that you could use to make these. We actually ended up using treated wood. And our reasoning is that we live in the Pacific Northwest where it rains a lot, and the rain just tends to like degrade your wood pretty quickly. And so we used treated wood, but what we ended up doing was lining the whole box with this plastic sheeting, and it basically goes all the way around the corners and goes all the way to the bottom. So that keeps the chemicals out, but we still have the wood that is treated and it's gonna survive our weather. The other thing we actually have at the bottom, which I can't really show you, is we used landscape fabric that we nailed in to the base of these raised beds, so it isn't going to allow um, weeds to grow through eventually, because at some point they're going to start popping through your raised garden beds. So that's something, I mean, it's a minor factor. You don't have to put that in, but if you're going to do it, you might as well put the landscape fabric at the bottom as well. The other thing that I really wanted to show you guys was our trellises. So I have installed 1, 2, 3 giant trellises that are going to be used for a lot of our climbing vegetables. That includes like snap peas, cucumbers. I have zucchini planted in there. I think different varieties of cucumbers, like the English variety and the slicing variety. And if you go to the store and try and buy these, they actually are really expensive if you're just going to buy like a standard trellis. And so what I saw on YouTube, and I'll try and link her below, her name, I forget it, I lose the name off the top of my head. But I think, anyway, I'll just link her below. But I got this idea off of her, and these are basically cow bales or cow fencing, if I'm not mistaken. And it basically comes as a single piece. I'm gonna So this bit comes as a single piece, and you can bend it and then have it attached to your raised beds with these metal supporting instruments. I don't know what they're called, but they basically work just fine like a trellis, and they're also super cheap as compared to
Stakes.
Okay, so stakes is what they're called according to Karthik. But yeah, so like I was saying, they provide enough support, but these trellises are super cheap. You can just I don't know if you could get them from Home Depot. It's one of those like basic garden stores that you can pick them up from, and they work well. It looks like they'll survive the weather here too. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much it for our raised beds. We're kind of excited. We have strawberries going, and I've planted a bunch of red onions, all sorts of other vegetables on the other end. There's like lettuce and tomatoes and chilies, lots of herbs. Um, and I'm just looking forward to seeing all these things grow. The other thing, if you want to have a look over here, I was talking about like putting up um, just a covered structure for those that produce berries. We're just in the midst of putting these in and kind of putting the material in, but what you have to do is kind of wait for the pollinators to get in, and then eventually we're going to put in bird netting over through this pipe. It's basically just like PVC pipe, and that way we'll keep the birds out, but the gaps in the bird netting are enough for pollinators like bees to get in, so that the birds don't come in and start pecking at our strawberries. But yeah, that's kind of what this whole project has been. I will give you guys updates on what these vegetables look like through the season. And if you guys are interested in more videos, do keep watching.